Hello and welcome to Fertility Talks, the Therapy Fertility podcast. I'm your host, Ranae von Meding, and this season I'll be sitting down with none other than the Medical Director of Therapy Fertility, Dr. John Kennedy. Each week, we will be chatting all things fertility, trying to conceive, and much, much more. We hope that through this series, through honest conversation and information, we can strip away some of the stigma that sometimes comes hand in hand with infertility and fertility treatment in Ireland. This week, in our first episode, John and I will chat a little bit about what infertility is and what options people have when trying to start their family in Ireland. Dr. John Kennedy.
Yes.
Very excited to be here recording our first podcast of Fertility Talks.
Yeah, first foray into podcasting for me. I've not done anything like this before. But
wow. I'll be gentle.
Thank you. Thank you. I've done a lot of chatting, so hopefully it's in the same wheelhouse.
I've heard you chatting before, and I think we're going to have
the problem is stopping, not starting.
We'll have no shortage of things to talk about.
No.
But yes, this is very exciting, and I wanted to kind of kick it off by asking you a bit about yourself, because I know a lot of people listening will know who you are, but for those who don't.
Well, you're kind to say a lot of people would know who I am. I don't think that's the case at all. I think
it is.
I think within the fertility sphere, I suppose. But
okay, fair.
Outside of that, I think there's a huge lack of awareness, and I think that's something we'll be talking about a fair bit. So who am I? John Kennedy is my name. I'm a doctor. I'm from Ireland. I'm from Dublin. My parents are from the West, but I was born and bred in Dublin. And I've qualified 21 years now since I qualified, and I did all my training in Ireland in obstetrics and gynecology, and I did over a decade at the coalface in obstetrics and in maternity units and in gynecology units. And then it was about 2012 or 2013 that I moved into fertility.
And had you always wanted to do that?
Paradoxically, not really. You do some fertility when you're in the general health system in the HSE, but very little. Ireland's a little bit unusual in that, for the most part, fertility services, formal fertility services, IVF and the like, are provided solely by private organisations, and the public doesn't offer that
and that's
service.
Different in other countries, right?
It is, yeah. I mean, most countries would have a mix of the two.
Sure.
So in Ireland, unless you're working particularly in an IVF unit, you're never really going to be exposed to IVF. You'll be exposed to some pregnancies that have come from IVF, of course. Yeah. You'll be exposed to some people who maybe have complications or what have you from IVF, but you won't really see it from start to finish. So until you move into that field, you're a little bit separate from it. So I was doing other things, but I wasn't loving it. Medicine and obstetrics particularly, and I don't really think it's changed massively. It's a tough gig. It's a lot of long hours. I mean, as a trainee, you're kind of doing your 70, 80 hour weeks, and it's grueling, and it's very grueling, especially as you get a little bit older and you have a family and you want maybe a slightly better work-life balance. Although I think wherever you go, there you are. But I felt it was time for a change, and an opportunity came up to break into fertility, and I took it, and I joined SIMS in 2012 and worked with them, making my way kind of through the ranks through to 2020. And I think it was around circa 2015, 2016, I became the medical director of SIMS IVF. We were responsible for 3 clinics around Ireland at that stage, and we were growing and bedding in and providing an awful lot of care. And I loved it, because it was from leaving the hospital structure. It was a brand new skill set. It was doing really new and exciting things, but it was still treating patients. It was still getting that positive feedback. And most doctors, whether or not they choose to admit it or not, are egocentric and egomaniacs. We are. Some of us are self-aware enough to know that we don't thrive on the positive feedback we get from patients. We need it. We physically need it. And if you take that away from us, we tend not to do so well. So it was still great to be working with patients, working with couples, working with women, helping people, as I had been throughout my career, but also working in a completely different field and challenge myself and learning a set of managerial skills and people management and process management, which you don't get the same level of exposure to in hospital medicine. So that was really, really exciting. And I took to it like a duck to water. It was great. And it really makes you wonder, medicine is broad enough that you get to find your own place.
Yeah.
But
and do you think you found your sweet spot?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. I found myself challenged in ways that I hadn't been challenged through hospital medicine. Not to say that hospital medicine isn't challenging. It's extraordinarily challenging. It's just they're different.
Yeah.
And I'd like to think I've thrived. I think I've certainly enjoyed myself, and I think I've enjoyed looking after people. And I think for the most part, people have been okay with me managing their care, and it's been fantastic. And then, of course, last year I thought maybe time for a change again, and there was a new organisation starting up, and I had some conversations, and we're starting a new thing now, but it's still infertility,
Yeah. So what is your favourite part of the process of caring for people who are going through fertility treatment?
This is going to sound a little bit negative, but it's easy to do well when everything's going well. Everybody's delighted. Big bullibus more, big round of applause when you do an IVF cycle and somebody gets pregnant, you have a baby. And it's wonderful seeing somebody come back with their baby or something, or doing that scan and seeing the early pregnancy. It's incredibly rewarding and it's incredibly satisfying. But the more important and more satisfying part of the job is managing the situation when it goes the other way.
Yeah.
When you've had a bad early pregnancy scan, when you've had a negative IVF cycle. Because that's the challenge. And I remember on my desk in the past and again, I had a slew of cards, which patients very kindly gave me. And the vast majority of them, of course, are from people who...
With their babies and...
and there's a photo
pictures
in there and things like that. Yeah, of course. Very normal. But some of them, and the ones that meant the most to me, are the ones who didn't get success and either went through a journey and then stopped, or had a miscarriage, or for whatever reason, it didn't work out for them in the way they wanted. And they still felt that the process was done as well as it could have been. Yeah. And they got to the point where they hadn't felt like they'd been marginalised or maligned or taken advantage of, where you'd worked collaboratively with them to get not where they wanted to go, but where they needed to be, perhaps. And I think that for me, and it sounds a bit cheesy, I know, but that's managing the negative is more rewarding than managing the positive, because it's harder.
Yeah.
It's not as easy. It's just a tough thing to do, but it's a core part of what we do as healthcare providers.
And you know what? I think that's probably why, and you are being humble when you say, you hope that people have enjoyed working with you, because I know, as someone who has gone through extensive fertility treatment to have our 2 children, I hear the talk, I hear the chatter, I hear what people say, and people do love working with you. And that's probably why, because you mentioned the word collaboration, and, as someone going through the treatment, it often feels like it's happening to you and that you don't have a voice in this process.
Oh, yeah, happening at you. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really difficult, because it's such an uncertain time. You're spending so much money, you're putting so much time investment into it. And then to just the uncertainty of, is it actually going to work or not? And then if you have, doctors with egos coming at you saying, this is your treatment plan and this is what you're doing.
The vessel effect. Yeah.
So I think that's key, I think, in patient-centered care.
I couldn't agree more, especially in something as personalised and emotionally fraught as fertility treatment.
Yeah.
Is that people have choices. They can elect to come and see you. They can go and see other people. So there's got to be a click. There's got to be a connection. They have to trust you.
Yeah.
But you have to be willing to listen and hear them. And also, patients in medicine in general, there's higher and lower degrees of compliance. So you would have cohorts of medicine where people are very non-compliant with medications. For example, in pregnancy, 50% of people, this might be an old statistic, so I won't stand over too much, but around 50% of people didn't take the medications they were prescribed because they didn't feel like they were right, or they didn't want to, and all the rest. So you always have that tension there between you trying to give something you think is in their best interest, but they not wanting to take them because they're pregnant.
Yep.
And in other areas of medicine, you have people who really aren't aware of their own medical history, aren't aware of the risks of their behaviours or what they should do or what they shouldn't do, and they're just not on board, and it's a constant educational battle. Fertility is not like that.
No.
Compliance is 100%.
Yeah, because people are desperate. They just, you tell me to jump off this bridge, I'll do it.
But people aren't that compliant in any other area of medicine. If you give somebody a course of antibiotics to take, they'll take them till they start to feel a bit better. And generally
then they'll be like, I'm grand now.
And then in a genius way, they'll think, I'll keep a few antibiotics for the next time. I'm gonna take like 20% of a course of antibiotics, and that'll be fine. It's a terrible, terrible idea. But in fertility, my God, they take everything when they're told and
at
how
the
they're
exact
told.
time.
100%.
Yeah.
And also, they're really, really well informed. So they know a lot of what you're going to say before you say it. They're going to challenge you with things that you mightn't have said and say, well, why aren't you talking about this? And you better be able to answer that. And if the answer is, it's perfectly okay not to know, but it's not okay to say, I don't know and I don't care.
Yeah.
If I don't know, I'm going to educate myself because it's a massively quickly moving and dynamic field. And a lot of the time you go, yeah, no, absolutely, that's a really good question. Here's why I haven't spoken to you about that particular thing. Yeah. And here's why I don't think in your particular circumstances it's of benefit. Because in this field, if I start talking about an intervention, regardless of whether or not I want the couple or the woman to go through that intervention, once I start talking about it, there's pressure on them to adopt it.
Yeah.
So if I start talking about various vaguely controversial add-ons or things like that, I have to be aware of what I'm saying, but also what they're going to hear. Yeah. They're going to hear, look, I'm going to have to go for this. Because he wouldn't have been talking about it if he didn't want me to do it, right? Even if I'm saying actively, I don't want you to do this, but if I don't talk about it, you're going to be coming at me. So there's always going to be that touch. But that comes back to that word collaborative of working with the person and having trust in each other, that you're all on the same page, you all have the same goal in mind.
Yeah, and that's something we will definitely be exploring as we go through the weeks with these podcasts, is talking about these huge inverted commas add-ons and additional things that people try to do when they're on a fertility journey. And I understand, we understand it's, when you're in this place, if you think anything can help, you're going to want to do it.
Won't do any harm, might do some good.
Yeah.
Very, very powerful justification. Unfortunately, can be used to justify almost anything. There's no end point to that. Won't do any harm, might do some good. And won't do any harm tends to be a bit of a throwaway statement, when, fine, it won't do any harm in the sense that you're not going to shorten your life or put your health at risk, but you're going to add maybe time, you're going to add a little bit of cost with a lot of things, and you're certainly going to add an emotional and psychological load. Yeah,
like a burden.
Of course.
Feeling like you have to.
But people don't think in those terms. They think, I am willing to take on any emotional or psychological load to get the result I want. And there's no ground floor to that, and there's no upper limit to that. And that will keep expanding as much as it needs to. But of course, that's not the case.
Yeah.
You crack.
Yeah. So let's talk a bit about this new clinic.
Yeah. So what we're doing, and we're hoping to open very soon during the summer, is Thérapie Fertility. Therapy is a brand which I'm sure many people are very, very familiar with. Not me so much, but then wasn't ever the target market, I think. It was one of the things I said to Philip McGlade when I was talking to him, this is not therapy at all. What I am is no, we'll fix that. It's a bold statement. But Philip has particularly been looking at this area for a number of years. He's been saying, and he's right, to be quite honest, he's been saying that there's an opportunity in Ireland to democratise and change how we approach the delivery of fertility care. So I had a couple of chats with him and the other members of the team that he had on board, and I talked about what I felt should be the direction for fertility service in Ireland. It very much allied with what they were talking about. I loved the vision. There's always a fear, and when you're talking to somebody who's entrepreneurial or talking to somebody who's really optimistic, because I tend to try to be contained, not pessimistic, but cautious, and don't overpromise, don't always underpromise and overdeliver. And when you're talking to somebody who's full of enthusiasm, you emerge from these conversations very enthusiastic, but you think, wait a minute, is any of that real?
Is that possible?
Yeah,
Can we do this?
Exactly. But you look at what the therapy brand overall has done.
Oh, it's phenomenal.
It's crazy. I remember talking to our COO, Grania, who I worked with in Sims in the past, who's on board in this venture now. And she'd been talking to him, and he said, look, a couple of years back, he said, this is what we're planning to do. We're planning to open 20 more stores in the next year. Yeah. They did exactly that. Mm-hmm. So I feel, and I've seen now over the last 6 months, they are absolutely going to deliver. We are absolutely going to deliver on this, for want of a better word, vision. So what we're hoping to do, we're starting a new IVF clinic. We're going to...
In Dublin.
Mm-hmm. It's based out in Carrickmines.
Carrickmines, yeah.
Yeah, out where the whole shopping complex is out there. It's very accessible. I love the location. It looks lovely. It's going to look
I haven't been there
gorgeous.
Yet, but I'm planning a trip soon.
We need to get you out there. Yeah. It's absolutely gorgeous. It really is.
It's the biggest one in Ireland. Is that right?
Well, I mean, we aren't seeing patients yet, so it's difficult.
Will be.
Like I don't have any real doubts about that, and that is not to denigrate the competition or denigrate the other clinics. The clinics I've worked in, which are really great clinics which deliver fantastic care. It's just I think that what we're going to be doing is so fundamentally different, as it's a game changer.
And why is it a game changer? What is the vision?
Well, right now, we think in Ireland, half of all the people going through IVF or ICSI cycles are travelling abroad. Now, that hasn't been the case for the last year for pretty obvious reasons because of COVID. But prior to that, half of all the cycles. So if you have 100 women having IVF every year, and obviously it's thousands, but 50 of them are travelling abroad.
And why is that?
Well, when you look at it, you'll be given a variety of reasons. You'll be given access to care, timelines, maybe specialist treatments or add-ons that aren't available in Ireland. That's all nonsense. It is for one reason and one reason only, and that reason is cost. Now, there are certain services which in the past weren't available in Ireland. One of them we're going to be talking about down the line, reciprocal IVF or shared motherhood, surrogacy, things like that. The real kind of niche. But overall, as a proportion, those don't represent a huge percentage of overall fertility cycles. So if we're
looking at the main proportion are IVF, ICSI.
The standard stuff, the standard IVF, ICSI and egg freezing.
Yeah.
Then they're travelling because it's cheaper.
And give us an idea of like a standard cycle. You know, I know it's hard to give a number because there are, as you say, a lot of add-ons.
It's hard to compare. A lot of the time you're comparing apples and oranges. Roughly speaking, a cycle of IVF with fairly standard sort of packages where you're looking to transfer the embryo on day 5 and you might have some embryos to freeze. You're looking at somewhere between €5,000 and €6,500.
And how much cheaper would that be?
It's probably closer to $4,000 in Europe.
Okay, so it's significantly.
Depending on where you go. And I mean, obviously, there's a bit of a race to the bottom there. You can find cheaper again, but you're perhaps taking a hit on quality. So there's a huge number of people travelling for cost every year. So that tells you something. That tells you that there are women and couples in Ireland who want to access fertility care, but are really discommoding themselves quite substantially. They're discommoding themselves in a couple of ways. They're taking time off work to travel. They don't have the same level of support and care both during and after the process as they would if they were attending a clinic in Ireland. It's just not physically possible to give somebody the same level of care when they're in a different country. And obviously then you're paying for the ancillary costs in terms of lost time at work and travel and expenses, accommodation,
everything.
These are things you're familiar with. So that population is there, and they are, for whatever reason, unwilling or unable to access treatment in Ireland. So that's one huge problem. The second big thing that we don't do properly in Ireland is fertility preservation. I've been talking about this for years, and this really comes back to what we were talking a little bit about earlier about who knows me, you know, and I'm sure there are some people in the fertility space who know me, but nobody else knows me from a crow. And that's because people in Ireland are really totally unaware of their own fertility. And it's not something we're taught to prioritise. It's not something we're taught to check. It's not something we're taught to look at in any way, shape or form.
And when you talk about fertility, what are you talking about?
I'm talking about either a man or a woman's ability to conceive. Not necessarily their desire to conceive at any time, but their ability to conceive and their awareness, and the 3 or 4 headline items that would contribute to them being able to do that, or perhaps running into problems.
And what are those headline items?
Well, right, we're into it now. You need 3 things to make a happy, healthy baby. You need a good egg, you need good sperm, and you need a place to put them. That's it. That's the cocktail.
And whatever permutation that happens those are the 3 things you need.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm being a little bit reductive with that, obviously. Sure. But it's a really good way to think about it, because it means that any tests or any treatments you're doing really need to be focused in on those 3 zones. Mm-hmm. And if they're not, then maybe you're getting less bang for your buck.
And what are the things that will put those 3 things at risk or diminish their ability?
So if you're talking about sperm and guys, sperm, the dad joke is sperm, like the creatures that produce them, are both simple and sensitive. Lots of things can affect sperm quality. Diet, lifestyle, weight, alcohol, smoking, tight underwear, hot baths, saunas, jacuzzis, day with a Y in it. Anything can cause sperm to go up and down. Some people have sperm that's just bulletproof. Doesn't matter what they do, their sperm looks fantastic. Mm-hmm. Some people have sperm that's really, really sensitive to
and does
lifestyle
sperm
changes.
Quality diminish with age the same way it does with eggs?
Yes and no. It diminishes. It certainly diminishes in quality with age, but perhaps not to the same degree. And again, the other...
Because is there a limited amount of sperm the way that there is with eggs?
Not so much. There technically is, but in practical terms, no. You will still produce millions of sperm when you're older. I think Charlie Chaplin, kids in his 80s. That's the line that gets drawn.
We don't recommend that.
No, we don't. Not so much. There's ancillary issues around that.
So what affects egg quality then?
And the big thing, the elephant in the room when you always get into this, is age. Sperm, you're generating constantly. They turn over. It takes 70 to 90 days to make a sperm from start to finish. Eggs, you start off with your ovarian reserve, with the quantity of eggs that you have in the ovaries, and as you get older, you use them up.
So that's all that ovarian reserve means. It means how many you have.
How many? It's quantity, not quality. The average age that people tend to run out of eggs at is around 44 years old. Mm-hmm. Some people older, some people younger. But quality also takes a huge hit as you get older. And as a general rule of thumb, you tend to hold your egg quality up until your mid-30s, around 34-ish. From 34 to 40, it drops. From 40 onwards, it drops much more precipitously.
Okay. When you're talking about, people maybe in their 20s, forward planning.
Yeah.
And being fertility aware.
So.
What are you talking about?
So I would love to see this get twinned with something like cervical screening. When you hit a certain age, you become sexually active or what have you, whatever markers you want to put in place, you should start having cervical screening, because that's a great way to prevent you getting cervical cancer. Fantastic. And I'm not saying fertility is like cancer. I'm really not. But I would love women in their 20s to have just a fleeting and passing awareness of their fertility potential. And there's an easy way of doing it. It's a blood test. It's called AMH. Mm-hmm. Anybody who's even touched tangentially to fertility treatment
will have heard of that. They might not know what it means, but they'll have heard of AMH.
But what they'll heard will frequently be wrong. So let's break into AMH for a little bit. Anti-Müllerian hormone. It's a protein. It's produced by the ovaries, and it gives an idea of the ovarian reserve. That's all it does. It doesn't tell you about the quality of your eggs, and nor does it tell you how likely you are to get pregnant any given month.
Okay.
You can be young and have a very, very low ovarian reserve and still be ovulating every month, and you probably have pretty much the same chance of getting pregnant spontaneously as somebody else who has a, in inverted commas, normal AMH. So you need to be very aware of that. AMH tends to get misrepresented in media, in TV shows.
And I certainly would have thought, if you have a low AMH, you're screwed. Yeah, that's what I would have thought.
You've had your fertility test, and your fertility test is low, and therefore your fertility is low. That's the logical progression. Yeah. Only it's not really like that. The AMH really tells me 2 things. The first thing it tells me is how you may respond in terms of dosages and cycle types and processes, and how many eggs we might get if we were to do something like IVF. So it helps me or other people working in this area to determine what kind of process to use and what kind of dosages of what
Okay,
kind of
so say
medications.
we're talking about someone who's young, who does not have kids on their radar at all. Why is it important for people to know their AMH?
That's the second thing. The second thing it tells me is how proactive you should be about your fertility options.
So proactivity is really the key thing.
And that's, I'm putting it number 2, but really it should be at number 1. It's so important. And that allows you to make a decision. Here's the trick. If your AMH is not the value you want it to be, and don't ask a question if you don't want to know the answer, that's not necessarily disastrous news. One, AMH can be an unreliable witness. It can go up and down in various points in the cycle. There's medications that can cause it to go up and down. If you're on the pill long term, you probably have maybe around 20% reduction in your AMH value, which doesn't mean you've got 20% less eggs. It's just it's an artificial blunting or lowering of the number. And it's only one look-see. If you do have a low AMH, there's other tests we can do. There's ultrasounds of your ovaries we can do, which gives us a better idea maybe of what your ovarian reserve is. But it allows you to make a decision. And that decision may be, look, I'm okay
I roll the dice,
knowing, and that and I don't want to do anything else. But, and I never feel good about using these words because it feels like appropriation. But this is about empowering women to be in control of their own fertility destiny.
And make some choices.
Giving them the tools to do that effectively. So I would love to see all women over the age of 25 get their AMH checked.
Yeah.
And I would like to see all women over the age of 25 then have a think. I'm not pushing it. I'm not recommending it. Have a think. When am I thinking about having a family? Should I look into fertility preservation? Should egg freezing be something I do? And for the vast majority of people, that conversation may be, look, I've thought about it and I'm not going to do anything about it now, and I might revisit this issue in a couple of years. Fantastic. But I'd love them to be thoughtful about it rather than have this sneak up on you in your early to mid 30s and suddenly realize that a higher proportion of the population are going to run into problems. And that's what we see.
Yeah.
We know that people aren't starting to have their families until they're 32-ish on average in Ireland. So we know a higher proportion are going to run into problems because the numbers don't lie. And I would love if they had been aware of that at an earlier stage. And one thing that is a common and constant thread when you speak to women and families and couples who've gone through fertility treatment successfully and you ask them, what are you going to tell your kids? And the answer always comes bursting out of them. Oh man, they're going to be hyper aware of fertility.
Yeah.
They're going to know. And I'd love to get not necessarily that degree of enthusiasm, but a bit of that out to the general population. But it's difficult.
Yeah, and normalize it a bit more, I think.
Oh, listen,
because it's not anything to be ashamed of. It's just, it is what it is. And
to be fair, I think that's something that's happened over the last 5 to 10 years in Ireland. I think that conversation about fertility treatment has become an awful lot more normalised, and I think people are less scared about talking about it. In the past, when I started working in fertility, there'd be loads of people, especially people working maybe more or living and working in more rural parts of Ireland, who would be terrified of their local community finding out that they were going through fertility treatment because the child would be, not quite burnt at the stake, but, would be
but
would
sure,
be treated
even
differently.
in such a Catholic country, that's a whole other
I mean,
kind of
I think that's part, it's not all of it, but it's part of the problem is that certainly the sex education that I had in school was not good. It
was not good for just, standard heterosexual,
God help
baby
you. God help you if you're gay. I mean, good luck. I always love that Graham Norton line. What you do when you realize you're gay? I just didn't go outside the house for 20 years till I left. So I mean, that's improved, and that's something that's changing, and that will be especially relevant in 10 or 15 years' time, maybe. But right now, we're still dealing with a cohort of people who were taught that you can get pregnant if you hang the trousers on the end of the bed.
Oh my goodness.
And that's not necessarily true.
Yeah.
And of course, you need to be oral contraception, unplanned pregnancies, and all of these things. Of course, that's a core part of it. But that should be twinned with a conversation about fertility. That should be folded into that. And it's not acceptable to pretend like that's not a real thing.
Yeah.
So, sorry, it's a bugbear with me.
So we talked about what fertility is. What is infertility?
So infertility, the World Health Organization defines infertility in a couple of different ways. And I've always tended to trot out these definitions a little bit. They say It's trying for 6 months without getting pregnant if you're over the age of 35, and trying for a year to get pregnant, not getting a pregnancy if you're under 35, because obviously it's like Cinderella on the night of your 34th.
It magically changes
Yes,
when you're 35.
Yeah.
When you say trying, you mean unprotected intercourse between a man and a woman.
Exactly correct. But that uncovers a multitude. That there is, how long have you been trying for? I was talking to the team about this last week. That's an octopus question. I've asked that question thousands of times. How long have you been trying for? And the majority of the time, the answer you get back is, you got to pause and go, well, we've been trying properly for, and generally it's a number between 3 and 6 months.
Yeah.
Is what you get told. And it took me years to work out what properly meant.
I'd be interested to know.
So, because properly to some people means we were having more regular unprotected intercourse. To some people, properly means I was tracking my temperature. I was tracking cervical mucus. To some people, properly means I'm using ovulation prediction kits. To some people, properly means I'm taking a raft of extra supplements, and I have him on a raft of supplements as well. But the one common thread that properly means is that it has started to become difficult. That's what properly actually means. And it's actually quite sad. There's a sadness in there. We've been trying properly for 4 months means this has been a chore. For 4 months, some couples stop having intercourse altogether. It's definitely not enjoyable. It's definitely not something that's happening organically between two people who want to have intercourse. It's become something
that you have to do.
Have to do by rote.
A means to an end.
Exactly. And that's the common thread of properly. So what I tend to say to people is, how long have you been not using contraception and having intercourse? And generally then you see that number go from 3 to 6 months to a year and a half to 2 years. You say, oh, actually you have, but we haven't been trying properly. But the irony is that you don't need to be trying properly necessarily to get pregnant.
Yeah.
There's a misconception that when a man and woman have sex, that the egg is released from the ovary and moves down the tube, and the sperm swim up to meet the egg in some kind of fighter jet formation. All little
music
triangles.
In the background.
Absolutely, and they collide and they get embryo. That's not what happens. Everything that happens in the tube, in the fallopian tube that connects the ovary to the womb, happens on the side. And the side of the fallopian tube is covered in these little hairs called cilia, microcilia. And they act like an escalator, like a conveyor belt, where they take an egg and they move it gently down the tube from one end of the tube to the uterus in a journey that takes 5 or 6 days. The egg, after it's released, will probably only live for around 6 to 12 hours. Sperm, on the other hand, can live in the tubes for 3 to 4 days. And what happens is, if the sperm is normal, if you're ovulating, if your tubes are open, and these are all really important things to check, and you're having regular unprotected intercourse every 3 to 4 days, maybe even a little bit less, you build up these reservoirs of sperm dotted throughout the tubes. The egg is passed through these reservoirs, which give the sperm a chance to bind to the egg. The egg and sperm then turn into an embryo, and the embryo continues its journey down to the uterus.
Okay.
Once you work all of that out, you will realize that regular unprotected intercourse is as likely to get you pregnant as focused, timed, ovulatory intercourse.
Yeah.
That's very reassuring to a lot of couples. It's incredibly reassuring to an awful lot of men who feel like they're under enormous pressure. It's somewhat reassuring to some women, and it's not reassuring to another cohort of women who want to have control.
Yeah,
who want
to know, we do it now, it's going to work.
And a huge proportion of people I've looked after have tended to live their lives on a curve where what they've gotten out of life is very commensurate to the effort that they made. And sometimes they've achieved what they wanted, sometimes they haven't, but on those times when they haven't achieved what they wanted, they're able to rationalize by saying they didn't make enough of an effort.
Yeah.
Then along comes trying to get pregnant, and it upends that whole thing on its head. And you don't have that degree of control. We know that spontaneous conception rates are 17 to 20% per month. So it can just take a few months. Maybe you haven't gotten pregnant in a year and a half just because of bad luck. Everything is working fine. It just somebody has to live on that end of the statistical curve.
Sure.
And it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not going to happen. Maybe you've just been unlucky, or certainly possibly maybe there's something we don't know. I think that we'd all freely acknowledge that. But the easiest thing to say to somebody and the hardest thing for them to do is, of course, relax.
Yeah.
Being told by your friends and family to relax, that you're really enjoying yourself and it's great, and isn't it great trying to get pregnant, that's torture. Maybe hearing it from a fertility professional should carry a little bit more weight. And I'm not telling people to relax. What I am telling them is the effort that they're putting in may not be adding to their statistical chance of success, and that by putting that effort in, they're putting themselves under more pressure.
Yeah.
How you square that circle, that's difficult. What do you do instead? Can you just pretend like you don't want to get pregnant or something, trick yourself? There's various different strategies. I'm not proposing that necessarily, but it's a useful lesson to bear in mind that just because you've been trying a few months doesn't mean you have to put yourself under any pressure. Easier said than done. When you walk down the street, you see nothing but bumps, pregnant women, all your friends, they're falling pregnant.
And that's natural. When it's what you want, it's all you can think about. It's tunnel vision. Exactly. And I have often heard of people, as soon as they stop trying, it happens, and that's just luck sometimes, isn't it?
As soon as I had my IVF cycle and my baby, then I got pregnant spontaneously. I had my other baby, and I was told it could never happen. Are you sure you were told it could never happen? It's so there's things like that.
So that is traditional infertility. What is I've heard it called social infertility. I've heard it called circumstantial infertility. So obviously not everyone who wants to get pregnant is a man and a woman. We also have single people wanting to get pregnant and be a single parent by choice. We have LGBTQ plus couples wanting to get pregnant. So there's obviously usually an ingredient missing in these situations.
I personally, I haven't heard it called social infertility. I think that's a bit of a... I don't quite know how I feel about that. I don't quite like it.
I was calling it social infertility for a while because obviously as, a queer person in a same-sex marriage, we would be classed as infertile, even though neither of us do suffer from infertility.
It's interesting because in one sense you never want to use that term in a reproductive choice patient where you've no reason to believe there's any other problems. And also I'm also very aware that terminology reproductive choice isn't ideal either. There's no solid language here, I think. But you very much don't want to be marginalised out in terms of rights and access to treatment and things like that. Oh, well, you've chosen to be queer, so you have to pay for your own treatment. What? That's mad. So you do want to acknowledge that these people are just as deserving of treatment as anyone, couple who attend. What you do want to do, and perhaps slightly more useful terminology in this space is, and this is the word I particularly like, but it's probably a bit better here, client and patient. So I would have patients come into me, and I know they're patients because they're coming in with a problem. They're coming in, we've been trying to get pregnant, we need to have these tests done, we need to look at treatment options, we want to try to get pregnant, we want to look at our timings or how quickly it is, we want to achieve our family, but we suspect that there is a problem here which we want you to diagnose and manage. Perfect, makes sense, it's medicine. But somebody who's coming in, who's in a lesbian relationship or who's coming in as a single woman, they're not coming in with a problem. They're coming in to access a service. And there's other ways they can access that service without going through healthcare professionals, but they want to do it correctly and safely and responsibly. But we have to treat them differently. We can't funnel them down the same pathway because they don't have the same emotional or psychological needs or load. Their expectations are different as well. And how you manage all of that, they are a different cohort. They are a different clientele than patients. So while they should be absolutely fall into the same melting pot in terms of access to treatment and funding of that, if we ever get into that, I do think you need to manage them differently. However, in saying that, I do still tend to say, if I have a lesbian couple in front of me, I investigate them in much the same fashion as I would a heterosexual couple, obviously, minus the sperm analysis. But because I still formally check the bloods, check the tubes, check the womb.
Because you may find that there are issues.
And just because you haven't exposed those issues by not having heterosexual intercourse doesn't mean those issues aren't there.
Yeah.
And while that sounds a little bit negative, fertility treatment is difficult enough already without blinding yourself to, and you feel quite the fool if you don't do these tests, and then down the line you kind of go, oh well, maybe we should. Oh wow, that was all that stuff we did over last year was never going to work. It turns out because your tubes were blocked.
Yeah.
Like, okay, So I do think you should follow a similar physical pathway in terms of testing, and but I think how you approach it and how you manage that couple or that woman's expectations are different.
Yeah, and so through this new clinic, through Therapy Fertility, I think the whole idea is to streamline the process and to have really robust processes, right?
So what are we doing? What's different? What's the secret sauce that we're bringing? Well, the first we touched on it earlier is affordability. It's going to be an awful lot more affordable. It's just going to be, for want of a better term, cheaper than IVF has been traditionally in Ireland. And there's various ways we've been able to deliver that. There's also going to be payment plan options and things like that. So it's going to be much more affordable and much more accessible than fertility treatment previously has been in this
which is going to just be game changing, because it will force.
That's going to blow it out the water straight away. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to simplify. What's happened is, because of the nature of fertility treatment, the nature of all those things we spoke about earlier, about the patients being really well informed and the doctors being informed, and add-ons and all that, the processes around it have become very, very complicated and very complex. And there's an awful lot of what I would characterize as noise involved in fertility treatment. And if you actually look at the evidence and you say, right, is this product A, product B, product C, is this thing that we're doing, is this of benefit? Does this increase this woman or this couple's chance of having a baby? The answer is very frequently, no, it doesn't. But you've added it in because you've been asked about it, because it won't do any harm and it might do some good, because it's a unique selling point that you have that the guy down the road doesn't have. So, hey, look, come here, we've got this, vitamin R, and we're going to fill you full of it and it's going to give you a baby, or I'm being hyperbolic.
There are things that people feel better about doing because maybe it helps. It's not going to hurt.
100%. And so, again, it comes back to that illusion of control, that feeling of being involved in the outcomes, or having a greater degree of control over the outcome. So we're trying to strip all of that away. We're going to be really, really honest. One thing I've been accused of is being direct. Thank you for your candor. And I was like, oh, that sounds like a compliment, but actually it's not. But it was said with love, I hope. But this is too big, too important, too expensive, too hard to not be candid. Your core job as somebody sitting in front of anybody who wants to have a baby is to manage their expectations appropriately, to give them as much as you can the most honest appraisal of what you think their chances are. Because there's still an enormous cohort of people out there who believe, well, if I'm not having a baby, I'll just go and do IVF and then I'll have a baby. And it does not work like that at all.
Yeah.
At all. Some people have very high success rates, and we really do think we'll get across the line. Some people substantially lower than they think they're going to be. And so your job is to make sure, just like with the AMH and young women earlier, that they're making the decision. They have what you believe are the best facts and assessments of the situation there, and then they make a decision about how they want to progress with their time and their effort. So that's what we're doing. We're going to, I'll obviously be heavily involved in terms of treatments and seeing patients and that, but we've got a really, really excellent nursing team. We've drafted them from all over the country. They've got huge levels of expertise, and we're going to be leaning on them very heavily in terms of the delivery of care.
So when someone decides to first come to therapy, will they meet with the nursing team first?
The first thing they're going to do is they're going to meet with the nursing team. They won't get charged for that consultation.
Okay.
And then if they elect to progress with testing or treatments, then they will obviously pay for those, and then they would see me afterwards, and we'll talk about it, and we'll firm things up. We want to keep things simple. We'll still, obviously, you still have to have a number of different cycle options and processes, but we'll we won't have the same level of complexity.
Yeah.
Whenever you speak to anybody who's been working in fertility clinics, and I know I have, I wish we could just stop for 3 or 4 months. I'd just love to just stop.
Strip it all back.
Strip it all back, make it simpler, tidy it all up. But we can't, because while I'm trying to do that, I've got this constant passage of people coming through in various ways. So we are in the incredibly advantageous position of
being able to start from scratch.
Yeah. And build our own thing and build by consensus and get expertise from various different sources and use the years I've got from the team who've all worked in different organizations, pull it all together, right? What was the thing you guys did really well that you knocked it out of the park on?
Yeah.
That you were so much better. Wow. And then you spitball, that's a really good idea. Let's do that. So strip it back, make it simpler, provide patients, use technology to smooth the process. Of course, there has to be a human element. It's fertility treatment. You're not going to want to, or nor should you get away from that completely. But you can use technology to make it easier to book appointments, to get your results, to look at your results, to take ownership over your own care. I remember when I mean, and obviously we're going back 20 odd years, when I started medicine, if you asked for your notes, if you were a patient in a hospital and you asked for a copy of your notes, you're like, they're going to sue us, right? I mean, we shouldn't give them their notes at all. It should take months or years. And it was a real us versus them thing. It was crazy, absolutely crazy. I mean, your medical records are just that. They're your medical. They're not my medical records. They're your medical records. I'm just minding them for you. So you should have access to them at the same time and in the same way that I have access to them.
There shouldn't be a massive delay. That
notion that I've done a blood test on you and you can't see the result of that until I've seen it and I'm ready to talk to you about it because
I'm the doctor.
I'm the doctor. It's so important. And you can't possibly understand it and you can't contextualize it. And if you get the information, sure, your pretty little head will probably overheat.
Yeah.
It's just madness. And of course you should have instant access to these results. You do your own research on that. We'll meet in the middle. Maybe you'll come back with something that I think is more or less barmy, but that's easily fixed, And this notion that you will somehow aggravate yourself or cause yourself undue stress or anxiety, I think it's a little patronizing.
Yeah, I would agree. So through therapy, the kind of process will be completely different. Like people will...
Yeah, I mean, it's still, IVF. There's still commonalities in terms of taking injections and having egg collections, embryo transfers, but it's going to be...
We're getting rid of the noise.
Very much so. Very, very much so. And I want to make something that's scalable and accessible.
And that everyone's getting the same treatment, right? Am I right?
This is it. And for the longest time, what I've wanted, and the secret little dream I've had is what I'm trying to do. And this perhaps sounds a little bit arrogant, but I think I've minded and managed my patients well. Mm-hmm. I want to take that process and I want to make it not reliant on me.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do.
That's a dream, isn't it?
Yeah.
Making something bigger than yourself.
I want to make it scalable and I want to make it accessible. So I want those things, those good things about the care that I have provided in the past to be available to everybody.
Yeah, because there's only a finite amount of people that you can physically see in a year.
Exactly, correct. And I had saturation on that some time ago, actually. So that's very much what I want to do. You need to have a huge amount of resources and expertise behind you to do that. I have that now. So it's all on us. It really is. And it's a wonderful feeling. So it will be accessible. It'll be simpler. It'll be more affordable. I'd like to think it'll be faster. And I think one of the accusations that could potentially happen, well, if it's accessible and affordable and all those things, you're saying it's cheap and nasty, right? No, it's not. And that's why I think I really want to get you out to the clinic, because you come and you go, oh, it's not. It's not. We've got world-class embryologists. You've got a doctor with a very solid reputation in there as well. So this isn't cheap. This isn't some low-cost model that's coming in. It's just a disruptor to an established service.
Yeah, because, nothing has changed because no one has tried to change things.
Nobody's had to. Yeah. So this is something different. This is something new, and different and new is very, very exciting.
It is, isn't it?
Very much.
So hoping to start seeing patients this summer?
Oh, very much so. Yes. I haven't seen patients for the last few months, and it's the first time in a long time that I haven't been seeing patients. I've missed it.
Are you excited?
So excited. It was funny because over the last couple of months, I've had occasional phone calls, people who had some fertility queries who I know personally or adjacent. And you just spend 20 minutes, half an hour talking to them, and you get off the phone and go, oh, I feel better than I felt in weeks. And again, it comes back to, I need this.
Yeah.
I've got an addiction.
Well, it's what you're good at.
And hey, listen, I'm delighted to enjoy doing it. So I cannot wait to get into the building, to see patients, to show everybody what we're doing here. I think, without being hyperbolic, I think this is the most exciting thing to happen in fertility treatment in Ireland since it first started.
I would agree. I would. So over the coming weeks, we're going to talk about lots of different things.
Yeah. There's loads of things that I'd love to talk about. I'd love to talk about the service that we'll be doing, which is essentially the fertility services. That's IVF, ICSI, IUI, intrauterine insemination, reciprocal IVF for shared motherhood or shared parenthood, or this, who knows, you can maybe help me with that. Egg freezing.
Donor sperm.
Yep. Absolutely. I'd like to talk about some of the things we're not doing as well. And I think some of the things we're not doing are really useful and have a fantastic place. I think there's a huge space for things like PGS, huge space for things like donor egg, and I'm really happy to talk about those things and services that we're not. I'd also like to talk about services that we're not offering, which I don't think have the same level of value. You know, I'll wear my heart on my sleeve on that and talk about it. So, I mean, I'll talk all day about this stuff. This is my bread and butter. But I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah, and I think we'll find our way, and people can ask us to talk about things that are
I think you've got a perhaps a wider social network than I do. So I like if people have questions. I mean, I think that would be a great way.
Absolutely. And I think we've also set up an email address people can email in, podcast@therapyfertility.com.
Fantastic.
But yeah, we can get into that more. But
I love that.
It's exciting.
Very exciting, and this has been lovely, I have to say.
Yeah.
This has been really much easier than I thought it might be. So it's a good thing, right?
Yes.